The South African Weather Service has issued a yellow level 2 warning for severe thunderstorms, resulting in strong, damaging winds, excessive lightning and heavy downpours expected over Mafube, Phumelela and Maluti Upper Fung municipalities in the Free State. It says this might result in localized flooding of susceptible roads, low-lying areas and bridges, and communities are advised not to seek cover under trees or tall objects during storms and to park cars under shelter. Meanwhile, the Free State government says relevant provincial departments and municipalities are collaborating to ensure immediate coordinated responses to the forecast inclement weather conditions. Cold weather conditions are expected to accompany rainfall in some parts of the province. A cooperative governance spokesperson Zimasa Mbeu says light snowfall is also expected over the mountain peaks. Meanwhile, the Eastern Cape Department of Transport is also warning all motorists to drive carefully as disruptive snow is expected to fall over the high-lying areas in the province on Monday.
Transport and Community Safety MEC Xolile Nqatha is appealing to all motorists to exercise caution when driving on the roads, as disruptive snow is expected to fall over the high-lying areas. Our traffic officers will be dispersed to all affected areas to monitor the situation, working with disaster teams and law enforcement agencies.
Severe inclement weather becoming a regular occurrence in South Africa, often with catastrophic consequences. The efficiency of national weather warning systems and the communications of its forecast has come under scrutiny. To reflect on the nature of our national weather warning system and possible hurdles to its efficient implementation, we're now joined by climate scientist Dr. Peter Johnston, and he joins us now via our video link. Dr. Peter, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. I mean, let's start off here. One would ask, it's quite rare to see, these kinds of weather patterns we are seeing, especially during the springtime. And also, one would immediately ask, why is the country experiencing such adverse weather during this time?
Okay, so it's quite a complex situation. Adverse weather obviously depends on who you are and where you're vulnerable, but these sort of cold conditions are not completely unusual. What's happening here is that there have been a couple of cold fronts passing the Western Cape, and the very cold and moist air has been pushing into the inland. And then there was a cut-off low and some thunderstorm cells that exacerbated it in the interior. So firstly, it's not completely unusual, but secondly, it's something that we need to get used to in the future, because more and more extreme events are going to occur. And when we talk about global warming, not necessarily saying that everyone's going to get hotter and it's people going to drive the heat. There are going to be more severe storms in the future, and this is certainly one of them. While we can't say this is exactly climate change, this is the kind of thing that we should be expecting in the future.
And you're saying, it's not usual for us to actually experience, these kinds of weathers. But I've seen a number of people saying, well, snowfall during the springtime. One would say that how often then, has the country ever experienced snow in September?
Yes, one could look at the records, and I suppose it's about 10 years. Every 10 years one has an event like this. So one could say it's unusual and unexpected, but it's not abnormal. And this is going to happen. It's going to happen in the future. It's happened in the past. And we must really look at how vulnerable we are to such situations. And this is where warnings come into play. And we've got to understand that we can see these situations happening a few days in advance. And warnings can be issued because we can see it happening.
What role does global warming or climate change, play when it comes to the weather patterns we are experiencing?
Yeah, so climate change is a result of global warming. Global warming is the impact that we have of increasing in carbon emissions in the atmosphere due to human activity. And that's a fact. This is happening. And what's happening is the atmosphere is getting more volatile, it's getting more excited. And we're seeing more extreme events occurring, whether those extreme events are very hot days, whether they are extended dry periods, whether they're highly variable climate, and also, indeed, very cold spells. These happen. These are, one can think, well, if it's getting warmer and warmer, why do we get cold spells? But it affects the entire planet, and with melting ice and cooler waters in some oceans, there is cooler air around it, and it pushes into the continents and causes these events. So on the one hand, one can't say that this specific event is due to climate change, but on the other hand, one can say that these kinds of events are going to become more common. So it's more and more important for us to do two things. One is to be aware of what climate change is and what's causing it, and try and prevent that. And the other most important thing is to be aware of the consequences and the impact, and how we can get used to that and prepare for them.
And talking about preparations, I mean, just last week we saw many people being stranded on Van Rhenen's Pass, and commuters not being able to move, also resulting in the deaths of at least 2 people due to hypothermia. One would ask, how prepared are we this time around, and have we learned anything from what we saw last week?
So the big question is, who's the we? The Weather Service is the mandated organization to issue warnings. No one else is allowed to issue a warning. If you issue a warning as a meteorologist or a climatologist, you can be prosecuted. So the Weather Service is the only organization that can issue these warnings. And so they are issuing warnings. Now, those warnings come out on the website, they come out as press releases, they come out on tweets, and so on. And the question is, who's listening? Is anyone listening to these warnings? And historically speaking, when a warning comes out and people listen or don't listen, it only really becomes news when people are affected. And last weekend was a long weekend. There were a lot of people traveling. There were a lot of people affected, a lot of people stranded. And so it became big news. If it had occurred in the middle of the week and it wasn't a public holiday and only the farmers had suffered losses and damage, it might not have been such big news. But these warnings are there. And the Weather Service, for the last event, had issued warnings ahead of time and said it was likely that these conditions were going to happen. But what needs to happen is the Weather Service is an organization which issues, broad warnings and puts them out there. It's up to the other sectors, like the water sector, the transport sector, the agricultural sector, to take these warnings and try and determine what the impacts are going to be for their specific sector and issue those warnings to their stakeholders and to the people who are concerned. And that's what needs to be happening. We need to have coordination amongst the different role players. And I'm not sure if that is happening efficiently or not, but it certainly this weekend has kind of been an overreaction. We probably aren't going to have that much snow on Preparedness part, and we probably aren't going to have that much damage. But I think we've learned a lesson here, and one hopes that this lesson is carried on into the future, because warnings need to be interpreted by the very people, or interpreted and spread and disseminated to the very people who might be suffering from the impacts.
And Dr. Peter, one would say that I'm gathering that you are saying that it may not be as bad as the weather we experienced last week, but what can the public expect when it comes, these weather patterns over the next 2 days, considering the warnings we have seen from the South African Weather Service?
Yeah, so the synoptic situation, if you like, the overall situation is that very cold air is coming into the interior. The Western Cape had a lot of rain this weekend, still going to rain tomorrow, big storm coming, there's a frontal system, and cold air is going to push in. Now, we can't say exactly where it's going to snow and how much it's going to snow, but a warning has been issued. So one must take advantage and say, well, therefore, I must identify my risk. Am I vulnerable to this warning? Is it going to affect me? And if it could affect me, then I've got to make alternative arrangements. So it's up to people to say, look, I'm going to be at risk doing a certain thing, certain action, whether it's agriculture, transport, whatever it is. And we must respond to that and say, well, I must take some sort of action to reduce my risk and to reduce the impact of this event on me. So while I can't guarantee how much snow there's going to be on, no one can say how much snow there's going to be. The Weather Service is watching this very, very carefully. There's no question about that. And if one is likely to be affected, one must look at the warning and say, well, let me make alternative arrangements. It's as easy as that, but it's as difficult as that, because some people just say, well, I'm just going to carry on and take a chance. And South Africans are like that. We like to take a chance. We like to sort of gamble with things, and that's great. But then when things happen and we're inconvenienced, we can't complain. That's the essence of it. The warnings are there. There's no question they're there. Whether they're being distributed and disseminated as effectively as they could be is another question. And I can't really answer that. But let's say that I think that the Weather Service has a responsibility to make sure that every sector that's involved and could be impacted by inclement weather must be told.
All right, Dr. Peter, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. I mean, that is Dr. Peter Johnston. He is a climate scientist, just giving us an insight in terms of what we could expect over the next 2 days.